It's always satisfying when a Pokemon uses its signature move to competitive success. You get to see it working in a way that only it can. However, not every signature move helps. Given just how many signature moves there are, this isn't all that strange, crazy though it may seem. Unknown is not the best user of hidden power. However, it can be surprising when the Pokemon or move in question just aren't effective, especially in the case of legendaries. So today we're diving into the signature moves that didn't help, and we're starting right off with a glowing example with Volbeat and Tail Glow. This is a good example of how such moves can be co-opted by others. Manaphy has wreaked havoc on competitive play ever since it was introduced alongside its signature Tail Glow in Generation 4. Wait, that's not right. But many a competitive player would, if not make the same mistake, forgive you for making it. After all, Manaphy has in fact been synonymous with Tail Glow destruction, especially once the move entered the realm of extreme boosting upon being buffed from +2 to +3 special attack in Generation 5. The fact that Tail Glow was actually introduced in the 3rd generation, and as something else's signature move at that, is something you might very well not know, given that the Pokemon first blessed with such an excellent move was Volbeat, which makes it make some sense. As far as awful Pokemon go, Volbeat is an all-timer, with a real stunner of a 430 base stat total, with its best stat being base 85 speed, and everything else being bad or worse, alongside none other than the mono bug typing that once had people clamoring for its Arceus form to be dropped down from Ubers. Volbeat did have something unique, which was the ability to baton pass Tail Glow, but when you realize Smeargle could also do this and ignore its bad stats by facilitating its setup through Spore, you realize even in that initial generation, Volbeat's signature move was better used by another Pokemon. That said, in Gen 5, Volbeat did get the Prankster ability, which gave its baton pass priority, which was something even Smeargle couldn't do, and this was right as Tail Glow had been buffed to boost special attack to +3. Plus, setting the Tail Glow in the first place would be made easier by baton pass having priority, allowing Volbeat to invest fully in bulk. Sadly, even with this, it was unable to really establish a niche, because even all bulked out, even in the lowest tiers, Volbeat really was just that terrible at taking hits. Volbeat was actually fairly decent in NU as a weather setter, but that's because setting up Rain Dance and switching out was much easier to pull off than having to successfully baton pass a Tail Glow to a specific target. Despite Tail Glow being Volbeat's signature move, it was less commonly discussed than how Ampharos had a perfect design for Tail Glow, what with its glowing tail and all. Volbeat got outclassed, so to speak, by a non-existent, entirely theoretical Pokemon, and that's really something. Now we move on to a fellow Gen 3 move and Pokemon with Latias and Mist Ball. Of all the many talents Latias has to put to varied, effective use in its long-standing, highly successful competitive career, its signature Mist Ball has never been one of them. Psychic Stab is already not something Latias tends to use a great deal across the generations, given that it has so many excellent moves to fit into its set, and Psychic doesn't tend to do too much that it can't already cover, while doing nothing to help against its biggest roadblocks, Steel and Dark types. But of course, there are times where Psychic Stab is exactly what you want, especially once Fairy types come into play in Gen 6. The go-to is Psyshock, whose targeting of defense makes Latias a little tougher to combat than your average special attacker, and how it threatens Pokemon like Blissey and Florges on their much weaker defensive side, as well as Calm Minders, and there's also stored power for the bulky Mega Calm Minder, which starts breaking through even resist after a couple of boosts. Even good old Psychic, though the most specific, had its place, and was far more useful overall for having the overall immediate highest power of the bunch. So what did Mist Ball offer? Well, clocking in at 70 base power wasn't a great start, relative to Psyshock's 80 and Psychic's 90. Mist Ball would effectively be running Stab Hidden Power Psychic, but of course, it wasn't going to be a signature move that only dealt damage if it was so weak. It had quite the secondary effect, with a massive 50% chance to lower the opponent's special attack by 1 stage. Well, it doesn't have to be Ho-Oh Sacred Fire, but this is indeed both spectacularly useless and hilariously redundant. Latias generally excels at taking special hits anyway. If you want to bring it down, you're better off with physical hits, which Mist Ball's special attack drop does nothing to dissuade. If Latias does want to boost its special hit taking, well, it has Calm Mind, which also powers up its special attack to better attack those would-be physical threats. And it doesn't only work until the opponent switches out, and it doesn't only work 50% of the time. Oh, there's also the fact that Mist Ball has 8 PP, which is half that of Psychic, yeah. Funnily enough, in Gen 9, Mist Ball actually got buffed, finally going up to base 95, making it even stronger than Psychic, and yet, it is still vastly inferior to the stored power sets that were so powerful they got Latias banned from UU. Additionally, if you want a move that can actually hit immediately, you're still better off with, if not the defense targeting of Psyshock, then the higher PP of Psychic. Mist Ball doesn't have the Draco Meteor level power that makes 8 PP justifiable. and that power difference over Psychic is so marginal that it's not worth it. Somewhat similarly to how Gyarados runs Waterfall, despite Aqua Tail being 10 BP stronger. The latter is 90% accurate, while the former is 100% accurate and has a 20% flinch rate. Gyarados doesn't miss the extra power, and neither does Latias. Psychic's 10% special defense drop rate is also likelier to actually help, since that makes Latias tougher to take on than the 50% special attack drop rate. In this vein, we also have to mention Mist Ball's twin move, Latios' Luster Purge, which was similarly useless for most of its existence thanks to its 70 base power, despite Latios being much stronger than Latias, and the secondary effect being a 50% chance to drop special defense, which was actually excellent if it had a good move to go with it, which is why Luster Purge became a top tier choice upon receiving the base power buff in Gen 9. Now we're going to take it over to a Gen 1 Pokemon that received its signature move in Gen 7 with Snorlax and Pulverizing Pancake. Let's diverge with the type of signature move only available in Generation 7, a signature Z move, of which there are many, and most of which are quite excellent, such as Como-O's Clangorous Soul Blaze. Sadly, this isn't the case for Snorlax's ultimate rendition of Giga Impact, given that it has unquestionably the coolest name of all the Z moves and has a real argument for coolest in-game animation as well. With Snorlax famously opening its eyes, it's especially disappointing that Pulverizing Pancake itself falls so flat, but it just doesn't fit with Lax's playstyle. In Gen 7, Snorlax loves the combination of the Gluttony ability, letting it eat pinch berries at 50% health as opposed to 25%, which allows it to make superb use of the pinch heal berries like Wiki, letting it pop up back to full or close as soon as it hits half health. And to push this further, it can regain its berry with Recycle, which effectively becomes a recovery move, as close as an equivalent as it gets to the slack off it's been deprived of for so long. It excelled in VGC and singles alike, with its belly drum set absolutely dominating in the former, while in the latter, non-recycle sets were strong as well. Classic Curselax crushed it in the lower tiers, enjoying that it wasn't completely neutralized were it to lose its item to a knockoff. These were setup heavy though, which doesn't always bode well given Snorlax's incredibly low speed. So what do you do if you want it to hit harder? Well, you go with the immediate power of Choice Band, that's what. Pulverizing Pancake doesn't really differentiate itself in this regard. Yes, the 210 base power is stunning, exactly the kind of strength you want from a one-time hit. But here's the problem, it's not doing anything against Snorlax's usual answers, Steals, Rock, and especially Ghosts. This means Snorlax is going to have to maneuver around its usual before it pulls off its Z move, which is a bit too much to reliably accomplish for a Pokemon so slow, especially since breaking through resist to its stabs quickly isn't something she's known for being particularly good at in the first place. A good Z move user can generally at least threaten the move to solid effect, even if it's got counters. For instance, the aforementioned Como-O Clangorous Soul Blaze can still be a great use even when the opponent packs an immunity to it, which happens often with how popular fairy types are. With Choice Band, not only do you have more immediate power to your normal stab that isn't one time, you actually threaten normal resist much more effectively since the coverage options are boosted as well. And given Snorlax's low speed and normal typing, meaning fairly limited switching opportunities, impressive though its bulk is, it really needs that to function. The only way you're going to use Pulverizing Pancake is because you want to use Pulverizing Pancake, which is of course all the justification you really need, but it certainly won't be because it's the optimal choice, which is why competitively speaking, if you use the move, the only thing getting pulverized is your chance of winning. Now we'll go from the famously slow Snorlax to the fastest thing in the game with Regieleki and Thunder Cage. Of all the interesting tools Regieleki can wield with its peerless speed, Thunder Cage is one you might not even know exists. If you can only go by the sets Regieleki actually uses, Thunder Cage is basically an electric type Fire Spin, or perhaps more accurately, Magma Storm, since it does actual damage in addition to the trapping and chip damage effect that is its primary appeal over its stab options like Volt Switch, Thunderbolt, and even potentially Rising Voltage, which is specific since it's weak without electric terrain, but does have a potential niche since it's so explosive in electric terrain. So how does Thunder Cage, which seems a great deal more consistent, get overlooked in favor of all that? Well, the concept of an electric Magma Storm is a fine idea in and of itself ever since Magma Storm was buffed in Gen 6 to deal 12.5% chip per turn as opposed to its previous 6.25%. 12.5% is quite nightmarish. It really adds up fast with Protect involved and is a major reason why even players running teams with more fire resist still wind up hating Heatran. So why can't Regieleki pull this off, what with all the opportunities its speed provides? Well, there's a few reasons. One, Gen 6 saw Magma Storm nerf from 120 to 100 base power, but that's still hitting quite hard, especially given Heatran's special attack. Regieleki is no slouch in the power department, especially when using stab, as its transistor ability makes its electric attacks hit much harder than a special attack would suggest. But still, the fact is that Thunder Cage isn't strong. At 80 base power, it's not weak, but if you have a stronger option, you're generally going to want to go with that, given how frail Regieleki is and how even its more powerful Thunderbolts are already not exactly dropping opponents left and right. The real difference though is that it's hard to find immunities to Magma Storm, since that requires the Flash Fire ability ability, and that's pretty much just going to be other Heatran, who fear Earth power and is thus not a safe counter to it. Other Pokemon, no matter how bulky or fire resistant, are taking Magma Chip damage, which is why it's so infuriating to switch into. Regieleki, on the other hand, has Thunder Cage stifled by the same Pokemon that are going to switch into it anyway. The ground types that completely blank those classic electric weapons, like Volt Switch and Thunderbolt. Basically, Thunder Cage does nothing to help with this, which is Regieleki's biggest issue. And to make matters worse, Regieleki's whole MO is to play as fast as possible, demanded not by its insane speed, but its tremendous frailty. Sadly, Regieleki does not learn Toxic, which would actually pair incredibly well with Thunder Cage on some sort of substitute protect set, as very few Pokemon are immune to both poison and electric. At least if you can pull Rising Voltage off successfully, you're probably KOing something, the promise of which is not more alluring than anything Thunder Cage can offer. Now, speaking of Doomed Desires, we move on to Jirachi and Doomed Desire. The last several generations have seen the Future Sight's delayed damage become a dominant strategy, so this powerful variant of it on such a long-standing competitive standard should have some use, right? Doomed Desire has changed over the generation, but it's already had a lot going for it. When it came around in the 3rd generation, it was typeless, meaning that it didn't get stabbed or hit anything super effectively, but on the other hand, it couldn't be resisted. Additionally, like Future Sight, in its early generations, it's calculated damage based on the defense stat of the Pokemon on the field, as opposed to the Pokemon that wound up taking the hit 2 turns later. Put simply, if you switch Blissey into Jirachi on the turn Jirachi used Doomed Desire, whatever took the hit 2 turns later would have Blissey's defense stat, which meant even if you switched to the physically bulky Skarmory, it would get absolutely obliterated. The move's typelessness was especially effective here, since you couldn't soften the blow with one of the tier's many steel resists, and seeing as Blissey and Snorlax were common answers against Jirachi's Calm Mind standard, Doomed Desire had a ton of potential to wreak a lot of havoc, especially since A, it still hit for good damage even against initial switch-ins with higher defense like Tyranitar, and B, its real strength was combining with its teammates' attacks for an unwallable offensive onslaught. Very few Pokemon would be able to switch into 2 attacks at once. Something already tough to answer like Tyranitar's Focus Punch became really devastating alongside Doomed Desire. Well, theoretically anyway. The problem was that Doomed Desire was really difficult to fit. Choice band sets were experimented with, but ultimately discarded for their inconsistency, as an all-physical Jirachi was just quite awkward in this pre-physical special split generation, as well as having issues with getting trapped easily by not just its usual enemy Dugtrio, but also Magneton. Non-choice band Jirachi sets struggled to fit Doomed Desire and had the issue of not having the move hit as hard. Well, okay, but what about Gen 4, when Doomed Desire became special, and so Jirachi could much more effectively run it alongside Choice Specs or maybe even Calm Mind, reversing the dynamic from the previous generation. Now, it could punish physical walls like Skarmory aiming to wall Ironhead, and as a bonus, Gen 4's general power creep with Life Orb, Draco Meteor, Close Combat, and such meant the offensive Doomed Desire would be even more unwallable. However, it still didn't live up to its potential, once again being tough to make a dedicated spec set work, and the move being far too difficult to fit into non-specs movesets. Jirachi's move pool was now so overflowing with excellent options, Doomed Desire just wasn't worth the effort, especially as the lack of stab tended to cancel out the opponent's inability to resist it. This was changed in Gen 5 though, as not only did Doomed Desire hit for steel damage and thus became a stab option for Jirachi, but it also got its base power buffed to a whopping 140 equivalent to Draco Meteor at the time, and even had its previously imperfect 85% accuracy buffed to 100 as well. Sure, it could be resistant now, but if it was paired with the right offense to punish steel resist, it could be a terror, right? Well, it was still the same problem. The move's mechanics changed so even the specs boost wouldn't apply to the damage if Jirachi switched out after using the move, meaning it really wasn't strong enough anymore, to say nothing of how poorly the move still fit on other sets. Even once steel became far more effective for its super effective coverage against fairy types in Gen 6, Doomed Desire failed to take off. It's strange to see such a unique, powerful move on such a top tier Pokemon, but well, on that subject, it's not good for our next Pokemon, with Dialga and Time and Necrozma and Prismatic Laser. Expectations are high for the ultimate attack of box art legendaries. Things like Palkia's Spatial Red and Lunala's Moongeist Beam are quite excellent. These two, not so much. It's not because the moves are insufficiently strong, no, not at all. There's no feeble power in favor of some secondary effect here, just an apex of damage. Both moves are variation of Hyper Beam, with insane power held back by the significant trade-off of being forced to give the opponent a free turn as you recharge afterwards. But man, is that power something. Dialga Dialga's Roar of Time, even stronger than the mighty Draco Meteor, looks like the final boss of all the Hyper Beam clones, sharing their 150 base power, but with that unstoppable Dragon typing that so dominated Gens 4 and 5, melting even the lone Steel type, whose resist allowed it some pretense of being able to withstand such immense damage, and coming from one of the very best Pokemon in Ubers at that. Then in Gen 7, Necrozma came around to really up the ante with the Psychic type Prismatic Laser, which was even stronger, its base power clocking in at a whopping 160. There are plenty of moves tied at the 150 mark alongside the Hyper Beam variants, such as Focus Punch and the variants of Water Spout, but 160 is in a class of its own. The only moves stronger pound for pound are V-Create, Self-Destruct, and Explosion. These are such insane numbers, you start thinking maybe these Pokemon can overcome the debilitating drawback of having to recharge afterward. It isn't a fair enough price to pay for what seems like such a guaranteed KO in the hands of such superb Pokemon, especially since Prismatic Laser would ideally be used not on Necrozma, but Ultra Necrozma, who's already a controversial figure. Well, in a way, that's exactly why these moves don't work. The Pokemon they're on aren't struggling with dealing out damage. They don't need the extra power, staggering though it is, especially when the cost is making them easier to take out in return. Dialga gets the job done just fine with Draco Meteor. Any contrived situation where the extra Roar of Time base power gets it a KO against something is just as likely to backfire for how it enables an opponent an utterly free Dragon Dance with Rayquaza or something similarly devastating. The same goes for Ultra Necrozma, which, while not frail, is quite a bit easier to take out in return than Dialga with its lower bulk and more vulnerable typing. At least Dialga could more feasibly stay in and slug it out against whatever would try to take advantage of its recharge turn. But even this was overly idealistic. These Pokemon were too excellent to waste by compromising them like this, especially when they really didn't need the extra help, damage-wise. In a similar vein, this is why Rhyperior and its rock record never took off. Now we'll finish things off with another duel, but one that is the same Pokemon, Kyurem with Glaciate and Kyurem White with Ice Burn. What is this, Persona? Anyway, the three Kyurem forms each received a unique signature move. It began in Black and White 1 when there actually were no Kyurem forms yet, just Kyurem, and the early translation, with the games only being released in Japan for the initial 6 months, which means Kyurem was Kyuremu, and its signature Glaciate was actually called Frozen World, which was a nice bit of foreshadowing for Black and White 2 in-game. Whatever it was called, there sadly wasn't much competitive use for it, because Glaciate is just a stronger Icy Wind, right down to its 95% accuracy. This is far from being bad conceptually, of course, as Icy Wind's speed lowering effect makes it a highly effective move on the right Pokemon. But at a measly 55 base power, that's even weaker than Hidden Power in Gen 6 and on, it's generally used in a supporting capacity on Pokemon that aren't dealing a ton of damage anyway, which is not the MO for the monstrously powerful Kyurem. If it were able to slow opponents down and deal serious damage though, that'd be tremendous. So it depends on just how much stronger an Icy Wind we're talking. Glaciate's base power clocks in at 65. Talk about underwhelming. It's weaker than pre-nerf Hidden Power. Well, wait a second, because in Gen 8, Kyurem gained Freeze Dry, which was as strong or weak as pre-nerf Hidden Power, coming in at a base 70, a mere 5 points ahead of Glaciate. Yet it was so effective that it helped push Kyurem to ban-worthy territory. Yes, but what Freeze Dry does, which is hitting water super effectively, is so enormous that it's well worth the lower power. Glaciate slowing opponents down is nice, but if that's all it does, it doesn't justify its low power, especially when most faster Pokemon don't tend to be too comfortable switching into Kyurem's powerful attacks anyway, and the slower Pokemon designed to check it through bulk don't care about being slowed down at all. Then Black and White 2 comes around, and Kyurem White hits the scene with Ice Burn. No lower power woes here, and no worries, it's not going to force a recharge turn either. Ice Burn clocks in at an incredible 140 base power, making it the strongest special ice move, the type's equivalent of Draco Meteor, except Ice Burn never got its strength nerfed down to 130 in Gen 6. And it doesn't drop special attack either. In fact, it does more than just deal raw damage. It has a stunning 30% burn rate, an ice type cross between Draco Meteor and Scald. What stops this from being basically the most broken, spammable thing ever? There's gotta be a catch, and yeah, there is. It's a 2-turn charge move. Never mind. This isn't a Dragon Dance Gyarados situation where the multifaceted boost beforehand complicates counterplay and thus makes the move worthwhile. Nope, the only way you're pulling this off is with Power Herb, and it isn't worth sacrificing your item slot for such one-time use when you could just unleash one of the most repeatedly spammable wall-breaking moves in the game, Specs Ice Beam. As stunning as that power is, I would take the special attack drop, and cool as it is, ditch the burn rate. So how does this not apply to Freeze Shock Kyurem Black? Well, it mostly does, historically, but for one exception, as in Gen 7, 7, when equipped with a Z Crystal, it was able to be unleashed immediately and with far greater power to boot, becoming Sub-Zero Slammer that was basically an automatic KO move, making even so-called resist look silly. The threat of it was such that Kyurem Black could sometimes even be used without immediately wasting the Z move when predicting players to try and pivot around it. For instance, if Kyurem Black had a free turn against Gliscor or Tornadus, or even a less obviously advantageous one-on-one matchup, by calling out a Protect and charging up against something like Celesteela or Ferrothorn, only to safely dish the damage out the next turn. Why didn't this apply to Kyurem White, you ask? Well, in addition to the fact that it already struggled in Ubers, the fact was that Specs Ice Beam was so good, it didn't need to waste its team's Z Crystal. Kyurem Black didn't have the equivalent of a spammable physical ice move that it could unleash with a Choice Band, or else it would have. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Amphozenus, Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Daniel Isbeast, Corman, Eric Dissing, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Jack G, King Yabber, Nightfall, Megamon VGC, Mojo Gameslayer, Nurse Jake, One Penguin to Rule, Pretzel SP, Seagulls Incorporated, Soljiro Sakura, Spavoon, Gylaria, Soras and Croxid, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, Tyler, Kiboflu, Wardine, Zathor for their major support of our videos.